Hello and welcome to this 101 quick start training for purchase lease options, or PLOs as we call them. My name is Simon Zucci and I'm really delighted that you've decided to invest in yourself and learn about this incredible strategy. So what are you actually going to learn on this on-demand training? Well, first of all, what are purchase lease options, PLOs, and how can you profit for them quickly? And it is one of the quickest strategies to start making money once you know how to use them properly. We're going to talk about why you should be using purchase lease options, and also when you should be using purchase and when not to use them. And this is really important because many people who've heard about purchase lease options don't understand when is the correct time to use them. They try and use them when it's not appropriate. No wonder it doesn't work, and they think options don't work, but actually it's just because they haven't got the correct training. I'm also going to teach you how you can quickly find potential options. Now, I can't teach you everything in 2 hours, but I can teach you what you need to know to start finding them. That's my objective of this on-demand training. And you will know if this PLO strategy is perfect for you or not. So why this 101 training? Well, look, this is probably the most misunderstood yet powerful strategy available to you as a property investor. People who think they know this strategy don't know it. And the reason I know that is whenever I go and speak at an event and I'm talking about this, I'll say, who's heard of purchase lease options? And at least half the room will put their hand up, okay? And I say, who's actually done a purchase lease options? And then almost everyone, apart from usually 1 or 2 of my students, put their hands down. This is because if people knew about it properly, they'd be doing a lot more of these. So most people really don't know about this. And I'm going to bust the myths, and I'm going to answer the frequently asked questions that will allow you to go out and put this into practice. And I want to help you understand how purchase lease options can be a win-win. That's a win for you and a win for the owner of the property. And that's very important to me. I teach you all about ethical investing, and I think there's plenty of scope for you to help other people and make money doing that. And I'm going to teach you what you need to know to get started using purchase lease options. So who should be using purchase lease options? Well, I believe you should be using them if any of these apply to you. If you're interested in HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, where you rent out individual rooms to people on a separate AST contract, it's a really good high cash flow strategy. You don't need to buy the property. You can control it on a PLO and use it as an HMO. Rent to rent is very similar to a PLO. You take on a landlord's property, you give them a guaranteed rental income, and you rent it out in a different way, as an HMO or serviced accommodation. And in fact, you make a profit on the difference between what you pay the landlord and what you charge the tenants. And that difference is your profit. The one disadvantage of rent to rent is you need to give the property back to the owner in 3 to 5 years. With a purchase lease option, you don't give it back to them. You've got the right to buy it if you want. So anyone doing rent to rent, this is an upgrade in your strategy to be doing purchase lease options. Also, serviced accommodation. That's where you rent a property out very short term and you get a much higher rent for that. It might be people who are on a holiday, might be people who are doing business, corporate lets, whatever it is. But it's a really good way of making a much higher rental income. And again, you can control a property on an option and use it as serviced accommodation. And then finally, if you are selling deals or doing property flips, a lot of people want to become deal sourcers. It's a great way if you're new to property to make some great money by finding a deal, selling it onto someone else. Or if you're already experienced in property and you're finding lots of deals, you really should be monetizing the deals that don't work for you. Obviously, keep the best ones yourself, but sell the others on to other people. And you can absolutely do that by controlling them and sell them on via a purchase lease option. So it really is a great strategy, a tool that you can use in conjunction with most strategies. It's great if you want to generate cash quickly from property. The reason it's so quick is because you're not actually buying the property, which means you don't have to go through the process of getting a mortgage, which might take 2, 3 or more months to do. You can get an option sorted and agreed within a couple of weeks and start generating cash from that property. It's great if you run out of 25% deposits for purchases. Typically, when you buy an investment property, you get a 75% mortgage, you put a 25% deposit in. And at some point, no matter how much money you've got, you're going to run out of deposits. So this is a really powerful strategy to boost the number of properties that you control. Also, it's great if you can't get mortgages to buy properties right now. Maybe your credit rating is not great. Maybe you've not been living in the UK long enough. Maybe you don't quite earn enough money to prove an income. Or maybe you've just got too many properties and mortgage companies are a bit concerned about lending more to you. So for all these reasons, if you can't get mortgages or they're expensive mortgages, you don't need to with purchase lease options. If you want to get a bigger property than the one you live in, I've done this before. I've been looking to buy, and instead of buying, put a big deposit in and have a mortgage, I've actually controlled property on an option, and they'll be able to buy it in the future. So if you would like to live in a bigger house in a better area, again, a purchase lease option could work really well for you. So in summary, I believe everybody should be using them. The reality is most people are not using them because they just don't know what they are and how to use them properly. And that's the problem I'm going to solve for you on this on-demand training. So you're in the right place. Now, if you want to learn more about this, I recommend you invest in my Purchase Lease Option 2019 Home Study Program. Enrollment for this is currently closed. However, we open it up every so often and you can get onto the notification list. Okay, now most of the contents of this video training come from the first of 6 modules. So I'm just really giving you an introduction, teach you what you need to get going, but there's a whole load extra you can learn, and it's in the PLO 2019 Home Study course. So at the end of this training, I'll tell you how you can register, get on the waiting list for the next time we open that up. And I thought just before I start, it's probably useful for you to understand a little bit about who I am. Whenever you're getting training from anybody in property, I think it's really important that you know that they know what they're doing. You know, too many people have maybe got a couple of properties and think they can start teaching people, and they can probably teach you if you don't know anything, but they don't quite have the depth of knowledge. So let me explain a little bit about my background. So I started investing in property in 1995, and you know, that's when I bought my very first house actually to live in myself. And I became a student landlord in 1998 because what I did was basically I bought one house, I then moved out of that house and held on to it in 1998 and started renting it out. Okay, I managed to replace my income by the age of 32. That was 8 years after I started. I'd left Cadbury's 2 years before that. And then I set up the Property Investors Network, which was the very first networking in the UK for property investors way back in 2003. I was kind of a bit of a pioneer of that, really. And I used my first purchase lease option by mistake. In 2007, I got into a situation on a property that I committed to buy. I couldn't actually buy it, so I flipped it on to someone else. And really, it was just talking to my solicitor at the time on how I could do that was how I first discovered this process. And I've shared this strategy with thousands of people who are on my property mastermind program over the last 11 years. And many of those people have used this strategy successfully. So this is not a new strategy. I've been doing it a very long time. And, you know, I'm sure I can help you become very successful in it. And also, I'm the I'm the author of Amazon #1 property bestseller, which is called Property Magic. I launched it in 2008. It's currently in its 6th edition now, released in February 2018. And it's also available on audio for the very first time. And that's the latest updated edition. So if you don't have a copy of that, and I do talk about that options. There's a whole chapter 6, all about purchase lease options. So I highly recommend that as a resource that you look into and see if that might be useful for you. Okay, so let's get into the content. I've got a lot to share with you. So let me give you an introduction to purchase lease options. First of all, what is an option? So there are 2 main types of option. And the first one is a purchase option. So let me break this down for you step by step exactly what a purchase option is. Basically, it's the right to buy something, but not the obligation to purchase it. What that means is we enter into an agreement with the owner, and if we want to buy it, we can buy it. If we don't want to buy it, we can walk away from it. So we're not obligated to purchase. However, if we want to buy it, they have to sell it to us. Now, there's a certain time period within which we have this right to buy, and it's called the option period. And also, we set a price called the option price or the strike price. Now, it's very important that we set the option price at the beginning of the contract. We don't set it in the future, we set it when we put all the paperwork together. And I'm going to run through an example to explain all this and make a bit more sense in a moment to you. There must always be a consideration, i.e. an upfront fee. It's normally £1. And you might have heard the expression, you can buy a house for £1. Well, that's not strictly correct. You can't actually buy the house for £1. You've got an option, the right to buy the house for whatever price you agree, say £200,000, and the right to buy that house, that option, has cost you £1. And you must give that consideration to make it a legally binding contract. And also, options should be assignable. What that means is, at the end of the option period, if you don't want to buy the property, you can assign it on to someone else and they can get the benefit and you can get paid for that as well. Now, I'm going to explain about option exit strategies at the end of this training, because it's really important not just think about now, but think about what you do with these in 5, 6, 7 years time when it comes to exercise. So I will cover that later on. So that is basically a purchase option. The right to buy something, but not the obligation, within a certain time period for a fixed price, and it must be assignable. And your solicitors who know what they're doing will put that option contract together for you. Now let's consider the next type, which is a purchase lease option, or PLO as we like to call them. And you'll notice there's one extra word in the title here, and that's the word lease. And lease means rent, to rent something out. So a purchase lease option, okay? So what this means is this is exactly the same as a purchase option. So we got a right to buy it at some time in the future for a fixed price, but there's also includes an element of a lease. And what that means is we pay a monthly option fee or a monthly lease fee to the owner of the property. And in return for that, you have use of that asset. You could either live there yourself, or you could rent it out, you could multi-let it, whatever you want to do. And obviously the idea is the amount you pay on a monthly basis to the landlord is less than you can charge out in rent. So you make a profit on the difference between what you pay the landlord and what you charge the tenants, okay? Now, the monthly option fee sometimes is just the payment of their mortgage. There are some people who just don't want the hassle, they want to walk away, and as long as you pay their mortgage, they're happy. Sometimes there's an extra fee, so it really does depend on the property, but we'll cover more of that later on in this training. So really all you need to understand is the difference between a purchase option and a purchase lease option is this monthly fee you pay and the use of the asset. Now, this particular training is going to concentrate more on purchase lease options because that's more beneficial probably for most investors who want to control a property and also get cash flow and potential equity growth from that asset. A purchase option is used sometimes to buy land or control commercial buildings or as a lockout agreement, but really PLOs are what most investors probably need to understand about. So let me give you an example of a purchase lease option just to put it into context for you. So let's say a property's got a current market value of £200,000 and you've got the right to buy this place. You agree you can buy this property, but you're not obligated to, at a fixed price of £500,000 anytime in the next 5 years. Now, what you've got to think about is this. If someone wants to sell their property right now and it's worth £200,000, do you think most people would be prepared to pay the full price? Probably not. Most people would want to get a bit of a discount. So in fact, we can offer to pay the full market price now, but we're just not paying it now. We're going to pay it in this case, 5 years' time. And in 5 years' time, 200,000 might well be a discounted price. They've got to pay the owner an option fee, typically £1, to make this a legally binding agreement. And let's say you pay their mortgage payment of £550 per calendar month. Okay? Now you look after the property. So if something goes wrong, you fix it. So before you take a property on, you want to look at it and assess it in exactly the same way as if you're going to buy a property. Look at the roof, look at the boiler, look at the things that can go wrong and think, is this going to cost me a lot of money to maintain, or is it in reasonable condition? Okay, because you are going to look after the property during the lease period. And the great thing is they can move on and they can forget about this property. They don't have any hassle. They know the mortgage is paid every single month. So why would you want to do this? Well, let's say you could rent the house out on a single let basis for £950 per calendar month. Then you can make a profit of £400 per month before costs, because remember, you're paying $550 to the owner for their mortgage. So the difference between what we're paying the owner at $550 and what you receive in rent is £400. Now, this could be a lot more monthly profit if you used it as an HMO or serviced accommodation. Typically, it might be £1,000 a month. One good HMO should definitely make you £1,000 a month cash flow. So therefore, just one property could be worth £12,000 a year to you, or £60,000 over 5 years' time. Plus, it might well go up in value as well. So that's not bad, given you've got no mortgage or large deposit to put down. This is why this can be such a powerful strategy for you. Now, in 5 years' time, the value might have risen, say, 250,000. It might be worth still 200. It might be worth 190. It might be worth 300. Who knows what it's going to do in the future? But let's just say in this case, it's gone to 250,000, which is a 25% rise in 5 years' time, an average rise of about 5% a year. So pretty realistic. Now you've got the right to buy this property for the agreed price of 200. Even though it's worth 250, you get to buy it at 200 because that's the price you set 5 years ago when you first entered into this agreement. You could buy it yourself, or you could trade it on to someone else. So either pocket the cash profit if you trade it on, or have £50,000 of equity if you decide to buy it. So again, a pretty good solution. This is in addition to all the cash flow you've had coming in. So this is why you can offer full market price, or sometimes even a little bit more, which is why owners agree to do PLOs. You see, if this owner decided to sell the house, they probably wouldn't have got the full 200. They might have got 180, 190, but still they would have had less money. So you're actually giving them more money. You need to get your head around this and understand this, because if you can't understand the benefits for the owner, it's going to be very difficult for you to present this to them and get them to agree to a deal in the first place. So the main benefits of purchase lease options are that you can get cash flow and equity growth from a property which you don't even own. You don't need to get a mortgage, which is great. You don't need a 25% deposit, and you can start making money very quickly. Now, let me be really clear. You might have plenty of deposit money and you might be able to get mortgages. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do purchase lease options, because if you think about it, if you don't have to get a mortgage, you could do it much quicker. And if you don't have to put a big deposit in, the profit you're going to make is going to be much higher in percentage-wise than if you'd had to put a big deposit in. So even if you do have deposits and you can get mortgages, this is still absolutely a strategy which you should use when you can use it. And most investors just don't know how to use them. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this 101 quick start training, is because most people are completely ignorant of how these actually work, or they don't really understand it. They've not bothered to educate themselves properly. So again, I congratulate you for investing in yourself. Investing in yourself is the very smartest thing you can do, because you have the knowledge forever. You can't lose the knowledge, and you can use this to make a lot of money. And what this means is there really is not much competition out there. As I said, a lot of people have heard about them, but really have no idea how they actually put them into practice. So how do you know if a PLO would be a suitable solution for a particular problem? And I want to be very open here, very transparent, and really honest with you in that PLOs don't work in many situations. Let me say that again. Often PLOs are not an appropriate strategy. This is a mistake made by many investors with purchase lease options. They try to use PLOs when it will not work for the seller. No wonder the sellers don't agree to it, and the investor then thinks that options don't work, and that's incorrect. They do work in the right circumstances. In fact, they can be perfect. So there are two key indicators which you need to look for that will show you if it is an appropriate strategy to use or not. Now, if an option doesn't work, there are lots of other things you can do instead. But I always want to do options if I can first, because I don't have to put deposit in, because I don't have to get big mortgages. So here are the two indicators you should look out for. And ideally, you need both of these for a purchase lease option to work. And remember, I said both of these. Very often people get excited if they see one of them. You need both of them in place. So the first thing is the seller does not need the revenue from the sale of the property now. Let me say that again. The seller does not need revenue from the sale of the property now. Now you might think, well, why on earth are they selling that property if they're not doing it to make money? And to be honest, most people who are selling a property are doing it because they want to get access to any equity that's in that property. Let's say a property is worth 200,000 and the mortgage is 120. That means there's 80,000 pounds of equity. And maybe the reason they're selling this property is they need that money to put into the deposit on their next house. Or maybe they want to clear some debt. Or maybe they want to put it into their business. Or maybe they want to pay for their daughter's wedding. Or whatever it is. Most people who are selling a property want the cash from the sale. So for those people, a purchase lease option is not really going to be appropriate because they're not going to get the money now. Let's say someone's selling a house because he wants to pay for his daughter's wedding, and you say, well, I'll tell you what, yeah, I'll give you the full price, but I'll do it in 5 years' time. That's not going to work for him. His daughter's not going to be very happy if she's got to wait 5 years for her dream wedding, okay? So you've got to really understand this, why they're selling the property. Now, you might think, well, surely everybody wants the money. No, that is not correct. Some people are selling because they don't want the hassle of the property. They don't want the liability of the mortgage. We'll go into these in a bit more detail in a moment to see why people do them. But just need to understand there are two groups. One group are selling because they need the money. One group who are not doing it because they need the money. Okay? The second criteria you need to look for are what's called favorable mortgage conditions. Okay? And if you are taking over someone's mortgage, it stays in their name, the property stays in their name, the finance stays in their name, but you are basically babysitting the mortgage for them. You have to make sure it's a good mortgage. That's what we mean by favorable. It's a good mortgage conditions which will work for you. Now let's think about this selling the property idea. So we've got to understand their motivation for selling. And as I said, there are two fundamental reasons for selling. One is they need access to the equity in the property, which is probably the majority of people selling. And this is the big mistake people make when they're trying to do options. They don't understand this fundamental criteria. They talk about an option to the owner, and the owner's not interested because they need the money now. And then the investor thinks options don't work because they're not going to work in that circumstance. And number two is they want to get away from the liability of the debt from the mortgage, and clearing that mortgage or not having to pay that mortgage is the most important thing for them. So you might think, well, hang on a minute, surely they could just let out the property themselves. If they didn't want the property and they couldn't sell it, they didn't need the cash, why don't they just rent it out? Well, that's a great question. But you know what? Most people don't know what's involved in being a landlord, or they might have had bad experiences as a landlord, and they don't want the hassle of letting it out. And they just don't want to do that, okay? They just want a solution, and they don't want to become a landlord themselves. Or maybe they are a landlord, and they really don't want to be a landlord, okay? So it's important we understand this. So never assume you know why or make assumptions. And this is really, really important because, you might think that someone wants the money, and Most people might think they want the money, but you need to dig deep and find the true reason. So we need to ask the owner what is important to them. And you might actually use those exact words. What's important to you when selling this property? What's important to you? For some people, it might be speed or certainty. Some people might be getting the most amount of money. Some people, it might be just getting rid of the mortgage as quick as possible. So you need to ask that question, what is important to you? And the information you get from the owner is going to be dependent upon the quality of the questions you ask them. You want to ask some great questions to elicit the information you need to understand their situation, to understand the problem, and come up with a solution to that problem. And it's really important that when you ask questions, and I would suggest you ask about the property first, and then about their personal circumstances. If you dig into their personal circumstances too quickly and you haven't built a rapport with them, they're really not going to give you the answers you need. So you've got to build a rapport, then you ask some questions, and you've got to listen actively to what they tell you. And this is really, really important. Most people are not very good listeners. And so you've got to really ask a question, and instead of thinking about what's the next question I'm going to ask, you just listen to what they say, and based on what they say, you then ask the next question, which is basic conversation. That's what we've all done since we were little kids, right? When we first learned to talk. You say something to someone, they say something back, and you respond. And that's what you should, but respond with the question. And I know that sounds like common sense, but it's amazing how uncommon common sense is. And you want to find out if there's any equity in the property. So that's the difference between the value and any mortgage that's there. Because if there is no equity, well, great. That might be the first box ticked. And if there is equity there, you want to understand, what are they going to do with the money? And again, you can't just blurt out with that. You've got to have a good rapport, good relationship for them to open up and be able to trust you to give you that information. So if there is equity in the property, the big question is, do they need the money now? And so we need to understand, is there going to be any cash released from the sale? If not, as I said earlier, an option could work very, very well, because they're not selling to get money, because there is no money from the sale. But if the answer is yes, there is equity, there is going to be money released, what are they going to do with it? Now, do they need some of the cash? And very often they might sell a property and use some of the cash to do something with, but they don't need all of it. So again, this is important, because you need to understand, well, you might give them a bigger option fee to give them what they need right now. If they do need it, how much do they need, and what do they need it for? They might want to buy a new car or whatever it might be. So dig deep to find out what they need it for. If not, what are they going to do with it? And the reality is, many people might inherit a property, for example, and sometimes when there's an inherited property, depending on the siblings, some people might really need the money, some people don't need the money, but very often if they're fairly affluent people, they don't actually need the cash. They're just going to put the money in the bank and do nothing with it. So we can give them more money. Most people want to get as much as they possibly can from the sale of a property. Okay, and of course they do. But we can show how we can actually give them more than if they did a traditional sale. And it all comes down to them being flexible on when they are actually paid. So you can offer the full price instead of a discounted one. As I said earlier, think about, if someone's trying to sell their property for £200,000 and that's the full price, the market price, most people would not give them the full market price. They'd want to get some sort of discount. And the mistake I see many investors make is they're thinking about buying properties below market value. So they offer less than the market value and then try and get an option as well. Now, if you can do that, well, great, but you don't need to do that. You can offer the full market price if they're flexible on when they get that money. So it's really important distinction to get around. Don't confuse this PLO strategy with also trying to buy at a big discount, okay? It's got to work for the seller. Otherwise, why on earth would the seller agree to it? So, as I said, if a property's worth 200,000, they'll get the full price instead of maybe 190. And then if they just put that money in the bank, they're really going to get no return on their money. And I mean that because right now, at time of recording this, the Bank of England interest rates are lower than inflation. So if anyone puts some money into the bank at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, they can buy less with that than they could at the beginning of the year because prices have gone up and they haven't had enough interest to cover inflation. So anyone who puts money in the bank really is losing money every single day. So we can give them a better return than that, okay? And what I mean by that is, let's say they're going to put, I don't know, 100 grand in the bank. They might earn £1,000 for that year if they're lucky. Well, instead of selling it now, we can offer them that full market price in a few years' time, so get more money then. And in the meantime, we might give them, if there's no mortgage, we might give them a rental income coming in of maybe £3,000 a year. So 3 times what they would have got in the bank at just £1,000. So this is, again, what you need to understand. To get owners to agree to this, you've got to see how we can help them and give them a better solution than they would just do on their own. Now, I mentioned favourable mortgage conditions, so let's consider what those are. So if we're going to be paying someone's mortgage instead of us taking out our own mortgage, ideally we want a nice low interest rate. And there are many people out there who've got properties that are on interest rates less than 2 or 2.5%, which is probably less than if you're going to take out a buy-to-let mortgage now than you would pay right now. So you've got a lower mortgage by paying someone else's than taking out your low mortgage if they have a low interest rate. Ideally, we want interest-only mortgages as well, and that's really important because we need to be able to demonstrate to people that if we're just paying their mortgage, because obviously, you know, an interest-only is not going to go down, but it's a less payment than a repayment. So interest-only is really good for us. Ideally, a buy-to-let mortgage, and obviously the people who have buy-to-let mortgages are landlords, and generally they're also going to be a low interest rate and probably interest-only as well. And then ideally, we want a long period still to run on the mortgage. So you need to see how long is the mortgage term. If their mortgage runs out in 2 years and they're due to pay it back, well, we can't really do a 5-year option because they need the money in 2 years to pay back the mortgage company. Now, sometimes you can extend mortgages depending who the lender is, but many lenders you can't. And so it's really important you understand about that. Or maybe there's no mortgage at all. As I said, if they just put all the money in the bank, we can give them much better return than they would get there. So it's really important when considering if a purchase lease option is suitable, you need to find out everything you can about the mortgage. And again, this is one of those things that people won't necessarily open up to you immediately. But if you said to them something like this, say, hey, look, I understand what you said. You don't really need the money from the sale. So how about if I can help you make more money than if you sold the property to someone else, if you sell it to me? Would you like to make more money? Oh, yes, I would. Well, we can do that. I can offer you the full market price if you're flexible on when you get it. And in the meantime, I'm going to pay your mortgage and maybe give you a little bit extra money and cut and babysit the cost of it and take care of it so you can move on and disappear and get that problem gone. And so you explain the benefits to them and say, look, if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to pay your mortgage, I need to understand all about it. So I'm going to ask you some questions about your mortgage, which most people probably wouldn't normally ask, but I do need the information if I'm going to be paying the mortgage for you. Okay, so that's a great way to get people to open up and actually give you the information that you require all about the mortgage. Okay, so now we understand a bit about the basics, and we know the 2 criteria we're going to look for, which is 1, that they don't need the money, and 2, it's favourable mortgage conditions. How do we actually find these potential PLOs? Okay, so let's look at that now. So what are you looking for? Well, remember, we're looking for sellers who've got some sort of problem. They've got some sort of challenge, and the PLO needs to be a good solution for them. Look, if they could just sell it cash outright to someone, that's probably the best thing for them. But they probably can't do that. They're not selling it for some reason. There's some sort of issue, and maybe we can come up with a better solution, one that they're not aware of, and it's about us understanding it. So maybe people want to sell it, but they don't mind renting in the meantime, because that's actually what we're proposing, isn't it? Or we're going to buy it in the future, and in the meantime, we're going to rent it from them, take away all the hassle. And it's got to meet those two criteria. You know what they are. They don't need the cash now and favourable mortgage conditions. If it meets these criteria, then maybe we can do a deal. And I believe the very best people to get PLOs from are landlords, okay? People who have an investment property that they have in the past rented out to other people to get a rental income. And for whatever reason, they don't want this property anymore. Maybe they are a tired landlord. They've had some challenges and some problems. They don't want the grief anymore. Maybe they're a retiring landlord. They come to the end of their natural investing life cycle. They want to sell up and go and sit on a beach for whatever reason. And the reason landlords work well is because they've got the right kind of mortgage, and also they're probably slightly more commercially aware than most people might be. Now, by now, you're probably thinking, Simon, this sounds amazing. It's almost too good to be true. What's in it for the seller? Well, I have mentioned some of the benefits already, but I want to make it really clear because you need to see it from their point of view. PLOs must be better than the alternative that they are facing. And, you know, they must be prepared to sell in the future, but don't mind renting in the meantime. Okay, and maybe they get more money by doing the PLO because instead of accepting a low offer from an investor now, we can actually give them a higher amount of money if they don't need the cash right now. Or maybe they get to reduce their tax liability. You see, if you've got a landlord who's selling a portfolio of properties, a number of properties, each year when you sell a property that's not your own home, a former rental property or something, you will pay capital gains tax on the profit. So that's calculated. They work out what was the purchase price and then the sales price. So take the sales price, take off the purchase price they paid for it, okay? And then they take off the capital cost of buying and selling costs. If you've done any capital work on the property, they take that off as well. And then they work out on the profit that's left over what tax you have to pay. And that's the capital gains tax. Now, each year you get a £11,500 capital gains allowance. So what it means is the first £11,500 from selling a property is tax free. On the rest of the money, you pay 28% if you're a higher rate taxpayer at the time of recording this, and 18% if you're a lower rate taxpayer. Now, it's not per property, it's per year. So you've got a number of properties, you're only going to get that on the first property you sell in a year. If you sold one this year and one next year, you'd get an allowance this year and you'd get an allowance next year as well. And if the property is in a partnership, you know, you own it with a partner, well, actually, you can sell the property and get double the allowance. You both get £11,500, which is £23,000. So if a landlord is selling their portfolio, they can sell them over a number of years and get that up to £23,000 completely tax-free every year. That can be tens of thousands of pounds of less tax they're going to pay in selling their portfolio. And they get to walk away from the hassle because you would take on the properties for them, you would run them, you'd get the profit from them, and they don't get the hassle anymore. They can move on with their life. So these are some of the benefits that the sellers get from the purchase lease option. So let's think about some of the circumstances when this might work. Well, maybe they want to sell a property for whatever reason, but they can't find a suitable buyer. Maybe the price is more than they can get right now. The price they want is more than they can get right now. And so because of that, people are not buying because it just seems a bit too expensive. I'm sure you've seen properties that are on the market and the price is just a little bit too high. Maybe they want to get away from the mortgage liability. They don't want to have to pay. Maybe it's an empty property and it's cost them money every single month and they really don't want to be paying that, dipping into their pocket to pay the mortgage on this property every month. Maybe they want to get away from the hassle of ownership. Maybe they don't like being a landlord, or they've had a bad letting agent, or something like that, and they just don't want the hassle, the nightmare, the thoughts, the energy that can be consumed when managing and looking after a property. So a pretty good reason, again, for them to want to walk away from it. Maybe they're about to lose the property anyway. Maybe it's one that is going to be repossessed. Maybe they've got into financial difficulties and they can't afford to pay the mortgage, and they're going to lose it anyway, and they don't really want to be repossessed and all the repercussions that causes. Maybe they want to sell the property but don't want to complete on the sale for a while. And there are a number of reasons they might do that. So let's say they've got a mortgage on the property, and if they sell it before a certain date, there's a penalty they will pay, an early redemption penalty they'll pay to the lender. Whereas if they sell it beyond that time period, they don't pay that penalty. So they could sell for exactly the same price, but depending when they sell, if they sell it later on after the redemption penalty ends, they'll actually get more cash into their pocket. Maybe there's a clawback from the council. Maybe this was an ex-council property. They lived there for a number of years. They had the right to buy the property. And then, for whatever reason, they decided to move on. And it was before the amount of time they're supposed to stay in the property and own the property. So they try and sell it. The council will come back to them and want a big chunk of cash. Or maybe it's taxation reasons. I've already mentioned the landlords who might be wanting to sell up over a number of years. And the reason that's even more relevant now is because in April 2017, Section 24 was introduced, where if you are a higher rate taxpayer and own property in your own name, you're going to pay more tax. And we're seeing lots of long-term landlords thinking about retiring early, and they want to get rid of the property but phase them over a number of years. So these are all circumstances that a purchase lease option might work. So when you're out there looking for potential deals, think about the circumstances of the seller. Think about the two criteria we need, i.e. they don't need the money now, favourable mortgage conditions. If you think about these, you can assess in your head, is this something that might work as an option or not? So now let's talk a little bit about where to look for potential purchase lease options. Now, I always think the best place is tired or retiring landlords, and there are a number of ways we can find these. By the way, you can do this with homeowners, of course, but I just think landlords are better because they've got the right kind of mortgages, and as I said earlier, they're a bit more commercially minded. So we can work with letting agents. So if a landlord is managing their properties through an agent, the letting agent is the first person who they will notify if they're thinking about selling their properties. They'll have a chat with the agent about it. So by getting to know your local agents, and by the way, this is something you want to write on your action list. This is a really clear action. Go and speak to your local letting agents and ask them, do they have any landlords who are looking to retire and sell up? Now, some letting agents might also do sales, but many letting agents don't do sales, they just do management of properties. So if a landlord says, I want to sell my properties, this causes a bit of a problem for the agent, because they're thinking, well, okay, especially if they don't do sales, well, I'm not going to get any money for selling it. I'm making money managing this property right now, but if this guy sells this property, I might lose that income stream, because there's no guarantee the next person is even going to be a landlord, let alone give it with me. They might already have their own letting agent they're using. So if a landlord's selling properties, that's not good news for the letting agent. But we can turn it into good news, because we can say to letting agents, hey, look, I know you don't do sales, but if you introduce me to landlords who want to sell their property and I end up doing a deal with them, I'll be happy to pay you a finder's fee. It might be $250, it might be £500 per property, but that can be a lot of extra income for literally no work for the letting agent. So landlords looking to sell is a great thing, and a letting agent can help you with that. So you definitely want to speak to your letting agents. The other thing is, you might have properties that the letting agent might have properties that they're struggling to let out. So if they're struggling to let it out, they're not making any money from it. The landlord's not making any money. In fact, it's costing the landlord money, because they probably have a mortgage they're paying. They might be paying the local council tax. They might be paying a little bit of electric just to keep the place lit and warm. And so these are bills that are going out for no benefit. And so if the letting agent doesn't pull their finger out and find a tenant, potentially the landlord might take it to another letting agent. So when we speak to a letting agent, what we talk about is we're offering them insurance. Insurance their landlords don't disappear by finding good tenants for them. So it's perfectly possible for us to take on a purchase lease option and still leave the property with the letting agent in this case, so the letting agent is not losing out. Now, we might put the tenants in, we might do all the work like that, but we'll allow them to collect the rent, pay it to us, pay a certain amount to the owner. So working with letting agents is a really, really good way of finding deals, and that should be on your action list, looking for properties they can't rent out, and also looking for properties where the landlords are looking to sell. So that's the first way of finding these deals. The next way is estate agents. So this is for people who have already decided they do want to sell their property. They want to get rid of it for whatever reason. Maybe it's to access the money, in which case we probably can't help them. But maybe it's just they just don't want the hassle of the property. They don't want the liability of the mortgage. That's why they're deciding to sell. Or it's just the property is surplus to requirements. So if we can go to estate agents, and if we find properties that have been on the market for a long time, we can ask the agent, why is that? So property's on the market for a long time. If a property says it needs a cash buyer, it means there's probably a problem with it. Maybe it's not a mortgageable property. Maybe it's got some structural damage. Maybe it doesn't have a functioning kitchen, which means, I say, you can't get a mortgage. So for this reason, the estate agent knows that someone is going to have to come and buy this for cash. Now, there are not as many cash buyers in the market as there are people who want to get mortgages, because really it's not a good use of your money to buy something for cash. So therefore, less buyers in the market, they might not have had the interest they want in the property. It might have been on the market for a long time. So properties they can't sell, properties that are cash buyers only, these are great ones where we can maybe step in and solve the problem for them. Because many of my students have found properties where they might have some structural problems. They've gone in, they've agreed a price based on the current condition. They've secured it on an option. They then control the property, then go in, get a builder to fix the problem, the subsidence, whatever it might be, and you need to make sure you use the correct builders to do this. They fix the problem, and then suddenly the property is mortgageable, and they can buy it, and they're effectively getting it on a big discount because they're buying it at a cash price, even though they're getting a mortgage. Because once they fix the property, it's then mortgageable. So again, buying from estate agents can work really, really well. And another thing to put on your action list, a big clue here for you, is if you ever see a property that says it's for sale, but also it's for rent. If it says it's for sale and for rent, think about it. What's the owner saying here? The owner's saying, well, I want to sell this property, but in the meantime, I'm prepared to rent it out. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do as a purchase lease option. We're going to rent it from them, and then we're going to buy it from them. So again, if you see a property for sale and for let, that could be a great purchase lease option. The problem with estate agents, though, if you go in and try and explain to an agent that, well, I want to offer this price, but I'm not actually going to buy it for 3 or 5 years, the agent will tell you to get lost. And the reason is the agent wants to make sure they not only get the sale, but they get their commission. Now, they get the commission once the sale completes. And with a purchase lease option, you're not buying for 3, 5, or maybe 7 years. So you can understand an agent's going to say, oh no, don't deal with this time waster. They're not serious. And by the way, most agents haven't heard of purchase lease options, and they're supposed to be the property experts because they've been selling property for so long. And yes, they are experts, but they're experts at selling property. If they were real experts in investing, they would have lots of investment properties themselves. Now, some estate agents do, but probably about 99% of estate agents do not own investment properties because they don't understand what we know. So if you go and speak to an agent, you'd never use the terminology, I want to do a PLO or purchase lease option. They won't know what the hell you're talking about. In fact, whenever you speak to anybody, never talk about a PLO or purchase lease option. Talk about the problem and how you're going to solve it with this solution you've got. And what I would say to agents is, look, I've got something. This property is not selling. If if you don't sell it, the owner might get frustrated and go and get someone else to sell it for them. So you're going to lose your commission. But I'd love to work with you. And I've got something where if it works for the seller and it works for me, we can enter an agreement. And instead of you getting paid in 3 or 4 months when the property would normally sell, I can get you paid in 3 or 4 weeks. Would that work for you? So what you're saying to the agent is basically they get paid. Now, the way you do that is part of the option fee, and this is only if you're doing it through an estate agent. Part of the option fee that you pay to the owner will be enough to cover the estate agency fees. Now, that option fee that you're paying now comes off the end price. So you've got to put it down now, and you're going to get it back when you actually buy the property. Now, you might think, yeah, but that means I've got to put money down. Well, yes, that is one of the things that you might have to put down, and there is a cost to do options. It's not just the pound, and I'll talk about that later. But if you think about it, it's a lot less than having to put down the 25% deposit as if you were actually buying the property yourself. So letting agents and estate agents, great place to find properties. Really, really good. And hopefully you put a lot on your action list. You can start doing that. Literally, you can go out tomorrow and start to look for these. The next way is to respond to landlord adverts where they are advertising looking for tenants. So there are websites like spareroom.co.uk where people are renting out properties on a room-by-room basis, and maybe they're doing it themselves. They might only have a few tenants there. They're not doing such a great job. So there's an opportunity for you to step in and do a much better job than they are doing. Or maybe they are advertising on Gumtree or whatever it is, but they're not using an agent for whatever reason. And what that means is they're probably struggling. They've got the hassle, and you can step in and take that hassle away from them. So what you do is you can send them a text. You send them a text message that says, hey, I see your property is available for sale, for rent, sorry. It sounds perfect. Would you be interested in doing a 3 to 5 year guaranteed rental? Now think about it. If someone sent you a message saying, hey, how would you like a guaranteed rent on your property? And especially if you are struggling to rent it out, you might think, that sounds great. Some idiot's going to give me this money. Sounds brilliant. And so you will get some landlords coming back to you saying, yeah, great, tell me more. And basically you say to them, well, look, would you be interested in doing guaranteed rent for 3 to 5 years? And if they say yes, the next question is, well, would you be interested in selling that property to me in that time period? And if they say yes, fundamentally, that's an option they've agreed to. Now, obviously, you need to negotiate and agree all the terms, but fundamentally, that's an option agreement, which is great. The next thing you do is direct marketing. This really is one of my favorite methods, and I tell everybody to do this. And despite telling everyone, not everyone does it. So, don't think everyone's doing this, but writing letters to landlords. So you can go and get the list of licensed HMO landlords from the council, and you can send them letters saying, hey, are you interested in selling your property or renting your property out on a guaranteed rental basis? And if you write to enough landlords, you will get some coming back to you. And some of the best deals my students have found are from landlord letters. Don't just write once. You need to do a campaign of letters, and you've got to keep in touch with people as well, because now might not be the best time, but 6 months or a year down the line might work really well. And also social media. Getting on social media, telling people, posting on a regular basis the fact that you are actively looking for properties, you're investing in property, because and who do your friends know? Someone who might want to be trying to sell or get rid of a property. Some of those sellers, maybe an option would work if it meets the 2 criteria. And too many people in this country are too shy and quiet. They don't like going on social media. They don't like saying what they're doing because they're worried about people judging them, etc. Well, guess what? If someone makes a bit of a snidey comment on your Facebook, there's this button you can press called unfriend. And just unfriend them because, they're probably jealous the fact they're not trying to do something to improve their life. And that's why people make snidey comments. And, you have a few keyboard warriors out there. But don't worry about them. Don't allow other people to put you off your goals, your dreams of what you want to achieve. The next best way to find deals is networking at property events and seminars. You might well go to the Property Investor Network meetings, the PIN meetings that I set up 15 years ago. There are 50 of those around the country, and if you've not been, you might want to look at this website, www.pin, as in PIN, Property Investors Network, pinmeeting.co.uk, pinmeeting.co.uk. And go to that website and see the 50 meetings all over the country every single month, apart from August and December. And there are some other great networking events as well. So don't just go to pin ones. You should go to as many of these events as you possibly can, because it's a great place where you meet people. And if investors are trying to get rid of portfolios, maybe they come to meetings like that to get some advice and see who they can connect with and see if someone might want to buy off them. Also, property seminars. It's a really smart idea to go to property seminars, 1, 2, 3-day events. And the longer the seminar, probably the better, because you've got a chance of connecting with more people. And especially if it's a paid for seminar, there are some free seminars out there. And, you know, some of the free seminars are okay. The problem with a free one, obviously, is the people who've organized it are going to have to make some money somehow. So they're probably going to give you lots of opportunities to pay and come and do other training. And that's fine. We generally don't do free seminars. We generally charge people for them. And we do that for 2 reasons. It means, well, we've already made our money, and so we could just give great value. And we might spend a bit of time at the end explaining what further training there is, fine. But we can give massive value to it, which is the rather way we do it. And we offer money back guarantees as well. So, you know, if anyone thinks they've not got great value up to halfway, then get their money back. So that's the first thing. We would rather charge and give more value. But here's the other thing. When something's free, unfortunately, sometimes people don't value it because they haven't paid anything for it. They don't value it. And so we constantly increase the investment to do my year-long property mastermind program. And you know what? The results get better and better. And I think part of it is because, you know, it's a reasonable sum of money to do the program, and people get incredible results, which is why they're prepared to pay it. And because they put down that chunk of cash, they're more committed and they take action. If something's free, people don't value it, they don't put the time and effort in. So by going to free events, you'll meet a lot of people who may not actually do anything or may not take any action. If you go to a paid event, you've got a more serious type of investor there, a more successful type of investor, and that's the person you want to network and connect with. So I really would highly recommend going to as many property events and property training seminars as you can. Great place to meet other people who you can work with. And then there are other investors and people who you know in property. These might be people you know online, you've bumped into in the past, you know, and they could be great people who might want to pass properties on. Okay, I do honestly believe the more people you know, the bigger your network, the bigger your net worth, is the saying. And I'm a great believer in that, because the more people you're connected to, you can pick up the phone, you can speak to someone, the more people who know what you're doing, if they find something interesting, they can call you and connect you. So really important to build your network and connect with other people. When we do a lot of our online training programs, you know, our purchase lease option training is closed at the moment, but in that, people get a Facebook group, and we really encourage people to come into that group. It's a private group. They can only come on it if they're on my mastermind program where they've invested in the training, and it keeps any time wasters out. It's a great place to ask questions, but also you can connect. And what happens is people come into that group, and particularly my masterminders, they'll come in and they will help and answer other people's questions, not just me and my coaches answering the questions, because they know by answering questions, they're helping other people. They're putting some good karma out there. They're also learning it better themselves if they're explaining to someone else. But the other reason is they're raising their profile. And when people want someone to work with, joint venture, or they've got a deal they want someone to help them with, guess what? They're going to go to people they know, like, and trust. So raising your profile in the right social media groups is another great way you can find potential purchase lease options. Because there might be someone who's less experienced than you, who finds it there, they don't know what to do, they post in the group, and you're active in that group, you come in, maybe you could joint venture, even though they found it, you could joint venture, bring your specialist skill to that group. So really important to get active in those groups wherever you possibly can. Okay, so how much money do you need to do purchase lease options? So I would say the average cost to do a purchase lease option is about £5,000 per property. Some options are less than that, some are more than that, okay? But about 5,000 is about the average. Now, what's that made up of? Well, there's going to be an upfront option fee, at least £1. But look, sometimes the option fee might be several £1,000s. And this is a big mistake I see amateurs make. If they can't get it for £1, they think, oh, it's not a good deal. Look, if someone's going to give you a property that's making £6,000 or £10,000 or £12,000 a month, a year profit, £1,000 a month, let's say 1,000, so 12,000 a year, 1,000 a month. They're not going to give that to you for £1. They might want to charge you £5,000–6,000 for that because they're selling their cash flow to you. So please get it out your head that you can get every option for £1. It might be quite reasonable to pay £5,000 or even £10,000 as an option fee. Now, in case you're thinking, oh, but what if I don't have that money? Listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. Then you might have a sourcing fee. So maybe someone else has found the deal, or you're paying an estate agent their fees, which we talked about earlier. You're going to have some legal costs for you, and you might even offer to pay the other side. Now, if you use a solicitor who knows what they're doing, an option agreement should cost between £600 to maybe £900. A straightforward purchase lease option shouldn't be much more than that, plus VAT, okay? And you might decide you want to pay the sellers as well for two reasons. One is it's a bit of a sweetener in the deal, so it's less money they have to pay out, but also it's a great way to get them to use one of your panel of solicitors who understands how this works. You see, if they go to their local family solicitor who's never heard of options, they might try and talk them out of it. So, oh, I've never heard of that. I don't think you should do that. And they don't want to admit to their client they don't know what it is. They'll just say, oh, doesn't sound very good to me. Now, they're not allowed or authorized to give financial advice, but very often they will give their professional opinion. And I can understand that because their job is to protect their clients. You know, and if they don't understand about purchase lease options, if they're a good solicitor, they might say, well, okay, I'll go and find out all about them. They go off and research it, and they take a long time to do it, and they're going to charge their client all the time they're researching it. So their client might be paying £2,000–3,000 for an option agreement, which is ridiculous, and again, might put them off wanting to do it. So maybe offering to pay for their legal costs might be a smart thing to do. Then you might have survey fees as well. You know, if you're taking a property on, particularly if you're new to property, and I wouldn't do a survey until they had in principle agreed the option, but you might say, look, let me just check the condition of the property. Let me make sure that it is structurally sound and make sure that the roof's not about to fall in. And, you know, with more experience, maybe you don't need to do this. But at first, you might want to get a survey done. I think it's really good also to get an independent valuation saying, what's it worth right now? And let's say it is worth 200,000, you're agreeing to pay it for 200,000. If you get a survey that says it's worth 200,000, you are then offering them the full market price. Okay, now that's important because if in the future they ever come back and try and contest that, oh, I didn't know what I was doing, I sold it below market value, because let's say it's worth 300,000 in the future, you could say, well, at the time, I offered the full market price. I wasn't offering a discount. It was the full market price. The market happens to have gone up really well, but it could have gone down. There's no guarantee. So sometimes getting a survey can be quite useful up front. And then also there might be refurbishment costs. Now, most properties need some work doing to it, even if it's just a coat of paint that it needs, new carpets or clean carpet, it needs some sort of work. Some properties might need a new kitchen, new bathroom, etc. And here's my general rule of thumb. If you take on a property that needs a huge amount of work, I probably wouldn't want to do a purchase lease option. If I was putting a lot of money in, I'd probably want to do what's called an EDC. So it's very similar. You actually exchange contracts, but what that means is, unlike an option where you've got the right to buy but not the obligation to, if you do an EDC, so an exchange with a delayed completion, when you exchange contracts, you are committed to make the purchase. So you do need to buy that property. If you pull out, you'd lose any money you'd put in, and potentially they could, if they had to sell it elsewhere, they could sue you for the difference. They had to sell it for less money than they agreed to sell to you, and bear in mind you're offering the full price. You know, if they had to sell it for less, they could sue you for any loss. So you only ever do an exchange with delayed completion if you know you're definitely going to buy the property and you can afford to do so. Okay, solicitors probably would advise you against doing it unless you've got a mortgage offer in place. The problem is, if you do an EDC for 3 years, well, a mortgage offer is not going to be valid because most mortgage offers are only valid for 6 months. So you've got to know what you're doing if you use EDCs. But the reason you would do an EDC, it gives more certainty to you and also to the owner. One of the objections people have for not doing purchase lease options, this is the owners, they might say, well, I love the idea of you coming in, taking over, looking after property, but what if you don't buy it in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years and you just give it back to me? I don't want the property. And so that is a reason why sometimes they don't do it. So in that circumstance, you might do an exchange for delayed completion where you're saying, look, I have to buy it in that agreed time scale. I'm committing to buy it. So that can give them more certainty. That can work really well. A couple of other implications you need to be aware of if you do an EDC. Oh, and by the way, if anyone is listening to this from Scotland, at the moment, purchase lease options don't really work in Scotland because the Law Society up there don't actually understand them and don't like them. So in Scotland, instead, you would do an EDC instead of a purchase lease option, okay? So when you do an EDC, because the sale is pretty much confirmed, at that point, technically, you should be paying stamp duty. So if there's stamp duty to be paid on the purchase, then you should be paying at the time when you exchange contracts. And on a similar vein, if the owner has got some capital gains tax to pay on the property, again, at exchange of contracts, technically that's when that tax is due as well, because the sale is pretty much completed. So just something to be aware of there. So if you're going to have a lot of money put into a PLO, exchange delay completion is probably a safer route, but just be aware, please write this down, you must make sure you can exercise the option complete on the sale at the agreed time, because otherwise you could get yourself in all sorts of trouble. So I just want to make sure they're really, really clear on that. So let's consider a normal purchase of a property versus a purchase lease option. So to purchase a £200,000 buy-to-let property requires £60,000 because £50,000 would be a 25% deposit, and then you've got £10,000 for the cost of stamp duty, legal costs, etc., etc. So £60,000 would buy you one buy-to-let property. But let's assume that each option on average costs £5,000. Some will be less, some will be more, depending if you're finding them yourself, if you're getting agents to do it or sources, it's going to be a bit more. But if you're finding them yourself, probably £5,000 is a very realistic cost. Well, with that same £60,000 that you could buy one property with, you could get 12 options. That means 12 times the cash flow and 12 times the capital growth. This is why options are such a powerful strategy, and within your portfolio, you should absolutely be using purchase lease options. If you're not, I think you are missing out massively and you're missing a trick. And the purpose of this 101 training is to give you what you need to know to start doing purchase lease options. Now, very often people say, Simon, this is brilliant, but what about the paperwork? What do we need to do around that? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about using solicitors. This is a legal contract you're entering into, and so it has to be done correctly. Do not use copy and paste agreements. Let me say that again. Do not use copy and paste agreements. I can always tell when someone doesn't really understand about options there, or there may be a new investor. They say, oh, can you give me the option agreements, please? Or where can I download them from the internet? That is a very dangerous thing to do, because each option agreement is a very unique and individual agreement based on what you've agreed with the owners. And so if you just try and copy and paste it and change the details, you might make a mistake. And it's probably not going to stand up in court. And so I would highly recommend you need a solicitor to represent you. So you don't need to know what goes in an option contract. As long as you're using the right solicitor, they will do everything they need to do for you. And also, you need a different solicitor to represent the seller. Now, this is a really important point because, you know, the whole point here is that if you enter into agreement, and you, by the way, you can sit on their kitchen table, you could write an agreement out, and that is actually an option agreement. We're going to talk about heads of terms in a minute. You could pay them £1. You've got a legal contract, not just verbal, but also written. The only problem is that's not very enforceable, because all that would happen is if for 5 years' time this property's worth 300,000 and you got the right to buy it for 200,000, the owner might think, well, you know, although it seemed like a great deal at the time, and although I didn't want the property, I don't like the idea of selling something now for 200 that is worth 300,000 pounds. And I guarantee you, what's going to happen in the future, as more and more people start doing purchase lease options, you will get no win, no fee solicitors popping up saying, have you been ripped off by a landlord? Did you enter this contract not knowing what you were doing? Blah, 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 blah. And so there will be people who are not doing this properly because they've not educated themselves, or they're trying to save money. They don't want to use solicitors, using copy and paste agreements. Look, trying saving money like this is a fool's game. You are potentially losing yourself hundreds of thousands of pounds in the future if all your options are done just on a coffee table with the signature of the owner. You give them £1, because they can argue in court, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. This investor, they promised me this, they promised me that, I really didn't know. Oh, poor me, I'm being ripped off. It's so unfair. And I guarantee there will be some people doing that. However, if you have insisted that they get independent legal advice, a solicitor who is representing them, that solicitor will sit them down, and as part of their duty of care, they will say, Mr. Property Owner or Mrs. Property Owner, do you understand you're entering into an agreement and you're agreeing to sell this property, in this case for £200,000, anytime in the next 5 years to this particular investor, and the property might be worth significantly more than that in the future, but you will only get the price that you've agreed today, 200,000. Do you understand that? And they will check that the seller understands, and they get to sign to say, yes, I understand. Now, this is really important for a number of reasons. First of all, look, I talked about ethical investing. We want to be very open with the person. We're not trying to trick them. We're not trying to con them. We're just trying to find a solution that solves their problem right now. And as I said many times on this training, a purchase lease option will not work a lot of the time, and that's absolutely fine, okay? But we're looking for the people for whom it is a great solution to their problem. They recognize that, and we'll be very open with them and say, look, it could be worth, the reason I'm entering this, I'm taking away the pain from you now. I'm going to give you more than you would get if you sold it right now, but there's a good chance the value is going to go up in the future, and that's one of the benefits to me. And if they're not happy with that, if they're too greedy with that, well, that's fine. Don't do the deal. Guess what? They've got the property problem. They need to get rid of the property. You don't need to do that deal. You should only do good deals. If, on the other hand, they're happy with that, well, then let's make sure they're happy with it and completely understand it. And if they sign that paperwork from their solicitor, say, yes, I understand, it's going to be very difficult for them to go to court in the future, say, oh, I didn't know what I was saying, because your solicitor will say, hang on a minute, we've got this signed documentation from your solicitor, and your solicitor went through this with you, and do you recognize this letter? Did they explain, is that your signature? Yes, it is. What the hell are you talking about? Okay, so this is why it's very important to get solicitors to make sure that everybody is represented fairly, because 5 years down the line, 7 years down the line, things change. People might not want to sell their property. It's really important you're clear on this. Now, the challenge here is most solicitors do not know about purchase lease options. As I mentioned earlier, if people try and use their local family solicitor or a friend, very often the deal won't happen. If you use the wrong solicitor, it can completely blow the deal for you. This happened to me. I had an investor who had a couple of properties, and he had one property, it was a flat. He didn't really want it. He wanted to sell it. It was in London. I agreed the full market price at that time. he needed a little bit of cash. I think it was a £10,000 fee to pay for it, which I was happy to pay because I thought, well, it was a good property. It was a small one-bed apartment. And this guy, I said, look, I can recommend some solicitors. And he wanted to do this deal quickly. And I said, how quick do you want? He said, I want to do it quick. I said, look, here are some solicitors. You pick one of these solicitors. I'll use a different one. Okay. And I said, these guys can all do it quickly. They also know how to do it. They won't charge you ridiculous fees. And he said to me, oh, well, one of my best friends, she's just started her own law firm, and I've promised I'll give it to her because she needs a bit of work. I'm trying to support her. And I'm thinking, oh, I can see where this is going to go. 6 months later, the deal still wasn't done. And I just said to this guy, you know what? I'm really sorry. There's no deal here. And I pulled out. Now, with hindsight, that property probably doubled in value since when I could have done that deal. I probably should have been more persistent. But, I just got so frustrated. His solicitor didn't get it. She was asking all sorts of stupid questions to my solicitor. And I thought, is this never going to happen? And the guy said to me, he said, you know what? You're right. I should have not used her. Lesson learned. So I'm just telling you from my experience, using the wrong solicitors really can be hard. So a way you can get them to use your panel of solicitors, they choose which one they want. These are all people who know what they're doing. Is you say, look, do you want to get this done quickly or slowly? They're going to say quickly. Do you want to get this done at the lowest cost or the highest cost? Okay. Oh, the lowest cost. Well, if you use one of these solicitors, they're very familiar with this. They work with my solicitors. They know how to do this quickly. And also, because they've done it lots, it's a nice low fee. If you use another solicitor who doesn't know how to do this, one, they're going to take a lot longer than they should. B, they're going to either try and put you off and you want to do the deal, right? Yes, I do. Okay. Or they're going to have to learn how to do it and they're going to charge you for that learning time. You're going to pay a lot more than you should. So which do you want to go? Quick and cost effective or slow and expensive? And most people kind of get that, and then they'll come with you. Now, if they are adamant they want to use their solicitor, here's what you can do. You can say, okay, well, there are two things then. They're going to use a residential conveyancing solicitor, someone who deals with residential property. Ask them if in that solicitor's law firm they have a commercial department. Commercial property. If they have a commercial property department, get the seller to say to their solicitor, look, why don't you speak to the people in the commercial property department, because apparently they will have done lots of options in the past. Okay, and that's true because a lot of land, a lot of commercial buildings, businesses are sold on options. So generally people in a commercial conveyancing department will be more aware of this. And if someone in their own firm tells the owner's solicitor, they're far more likely to believe it. Or a second alternative, you might say, well, I can get my solicitor to call your solicitor and talk them through it. And again, that my solicitor will certainly do that, and that's helped as well in the past. Okay, but it really is important that you use solicitors for you and also for the seller. So what you need to do, and this is what is your responsibility, this is the paperwork you do need to know about, is write the heads of terms. So the heads of terms is basically the agreement that you're coming up, you and the owner have come up with, and obviously it can be completely different on every deal, which is why there's no real any standard here. But let me talk you through the heads of terms. What's the information that you need to agree and clarify with the owner, such that you can then go to the solicitors and they can put together the legal contract for you that represents the deal you've just agreed. So this is really important. You want to write this down. This is what comes in the heads of terms agreement. So first of all, and this could be a contract for a loan. Any agreement has this basic information. So first of all, your full name and home address, or your correspondence address, which is probably going to be your home. So your full name and home address. Then you want to have the seller's full name and their home address. Bear in mind, the property on which you're doing the option might be that address, it's probably going to be a different address. So you also need the address of the property on which you're doing the option. So your full name and home address, their full name and their home address, and then the property address on which you're doing the option. Okay, so nothing unusual here. Literally, you can write this out on a piece of A4 paper, okay? Or you can have it printed out and just fill in the blanks. Then you've got the agreed purchase price. So this is what you're paying. This is the option price. This is the strike price. This is the price at which you can buy this property anytime within the agreed time period. And it is really important that you set a fixed price. Sometimes people say, well, what if the value goes up and I want to give 50% of the growth to the owner, and we're going to do some complicated calculation and we'll get a valuation in the future and we'll split the difference. Well, that is not good, because that leads to ambiguity. If there's ambiguity in the contract, there's more chance a solicitor or a judge will turn it over in the future. You need to be crystal clear. So what are you going to pay them? It's worth $200,000 now. Are you going to pay them $200,000 or $210,000? Set the price today that they can buy it for in the future. It's really important. In our little Facebook group, where we have people who do our option training, a lady was talking about, she'd got a sourcer who potentially was going to give her some deals and charge her a fee, and she wanted to know if they were good deals or not, and she didn't know what the actual purchase price was. They didn't tell her. And so it's a key thing she had missed. So it's really important, guys, to say what's the purchase price you're agreeing it for. Might sound obvious, but I've seen people get this wrong in the past. Then the length of the option. So this agreement is for 6 months, 3 years, 7 years, whatever it might be. Now, when it comes to the length of the option, I want to think about this. The longer the option, the more chance of the value of the property going up over time. So if it was a 7-year option, I would be okay with maybe offering slightly over the market price for a property, if that's what I needed to do. If it was only a 3-year option, I'd want to offer the current market price or maybe slightly less, because 3 years is not a lot for the value to go up. And one of the benefits of options is hopefully the value goes up over time before you actually exercise the option. The contrary to that is, the other side of the coin is that the longer the agreement, the more likely the circumstance of the owner can change, and you don't want to have an agreement going on forever. And also remember to check, if they do have a mortgage, how long is there left to run on their mortgage, because your option can't really go on beyond the length of their mortgage. Then there's an upfront option fee. It's usually £1, but it might be several £1,000s. And again, I've seen people who have walked away from really good options just because maybe there were several £1,000s payable up front, and in their head they were thinking, oh, I don't want to pay thousands of pounds. Well, look, what you've got to understand is, if this gives you really good cash flow, you might get a really high return on investment. So let me give you an example. Let's say a property makes you £500 a month profit after all expenses. That's £6,000 a year, okay? And maybe this costs £6,000 in terms of an upfront option. Let's say the property's in great condition, don't need to do anything for it, but because of that, because it makes £500 a month, the landlord's not just going to give it to you for £1, they want to get £6,000. So think about it. Would you do that deal? If it's a £6,000 fee and you get £6,000 a year, would you do it? Some would say, oh, no, I don't want to put down £6,000. It's way too much. I'll only do an option if I get it for £1. Well, think of it this way. If you look at return on investment is where you look at the annual profit you make divided by the initial investment you make, and then multiply by 100 to give you a percentage. So let me ask you another question. If you were making an investment gave you 100% return on investment in a year, would that be a good investment? And people say, oh yeah, well, that'd be really good. Well, that's exactly the scenario here. £6,000 option fee, £6,000 rental income, therefore it's a 100% return on investment, i.e. you get all your money back in a year, and if you've got another 4 or 5 years, all those extra years of profit plus the capital growth. So that's a pretty good deal, right? So don't be put off by looking at how much option fee you have to put in up front. It might be a lot more than £1. You've got to understand what's the return on investment. So compare that to how much you're going to make each year to work out the ROI. And if you've got a nice high ROI, even if you don't have the £6,000 in this case, you could borrow it from someone else, give them a healthy return on their interest, and still be able to do this deal using none of your own money. So it's really important to think about that. Then you've got details of any monthly option fee. Now, the monthly option fee, it could be whatever their mortgage is. And in the option, it would say, we've agreed to pay your mortgage, whatever it is, whether it goes up or down, we'll just pay that mortgage rate. So that's one thing you could do. Or it might be their mortgage plus £150. I did an option with a lady, and she's a shrewd lady. She said, well, no, now it needed some work doing on the property, I must admit, but she wasn't happy with me just to pay the mortgage. She wanted to get some cash flow from it, albeit the property was actually empty at the time. And this is really important. You know, this property would rent out for about £750 a month, and it did rent out for that when I did it up, just as a single let. But very often the owner will be thinking about, oh, how much rental income they could get. Well, that's fine if it's fully let. But very often you'll have someone who's doing an option where the property is not fully let. Maybe they've got 1 or 2 rooms that are let, or it's empty right now. So don't get them thinking about how much rent they could get. Get them thinking about how much they're not making, how much they're losing every single month because they've got that mortgage they're paying and bills and things like that. So based on that, there are many people who will be happy just for you to meet their mortgage if they can walk away and forget about it. So work out what that fee is going to be. And sometimes it might be a fixed amount. You might say, well, it's £500 a month or £1,000 a month or £2,000 a month. Remember, they may not have a mortgage. So it might be just this is profit that's coming to them. And I'd want to make sure that what you're giving them is more than they could make if they just sold the property and put the money in the bank. So they've got to be making more, but it's less than you should pay if you had a mortgage. So let me say that again. When working out what the monthly fee should be, if you were to actually buy this property and put in the 25% deposit and get your 75% mortgage, work out how much your mortgage would cost. And for this to be a favorable mortgage condition, ideally you want to be paying them less than you would be paying if you actually bought the property and got a mortgage on it, okay? Because if you're paying them more than, well, it might be worth you actually just buying this property straight out instead of doing an option. That might be a better route. And so, you know, I love options. I always want to look if I can do an option on a property, but there are some circumstances. I've seen people they're trying to do options and maybe they can do an option, but you know what? It's actually just a good deal to buy the property in the first place. So that's the caveat to all this training, really, in that sometimes just buying it might be the right thing to do. So anyway, remember, when it comes to the monthly option fee, it might be just the mortgage, it might be something extra. Ideally, it should be less than it would cost you if you were to buy it today and get a mortgage on it. Now, you can either pay the fee direct to the owner, and they pay the mortgage company if there's a mortgage, or it might be that you pay the mortgage, and whenever you do an option, you want to get a letter of authority so you can speak to them just to check all the details on the mortgage are as you believe they are, and then you can request a new bank payment form. I'm saying a new bank payment form because sometimes people do change their banks. I changed my bank earlier in the year and I went to my lender to say, look, I need a new bank payment form so I can set up a new direct debit with you. And so they'll send you a form and you can write your bank details. And at the end of the day, they don't really mind who's paying it. They just want to make sure the mortgage is paid every single month. So it might be that you want to pay the mortgage direct to the lender. Now, if you think about this, the reason you might want to do that is because if for any reason the landlord didn't pay the mortgage, the property would go into arrears and ultimately be repossessed and your option would be pretty much worthless. So you want to make sure the landlord pays. So that might be why you want to pay direct to the mortgage company. But looking at it from the landlord's point of view, they want to make sure that you pay, because if you don't pay it, they're the one who's going to get repossessed and they can get into trouble. So really, both parties need the mortgage to be paid. So what you could do is this. You could enter it into your agreement, and this might be some of the special conditions, special terms, that actually you're happy to pay this a monthly option fee to them. But if they miss a single mortgage payment, you have the right to make that particular payment direct to the mortgage company every month, and any surplus payment will go to them. And you can do this by being listed as one of the correspondents. So if they don't pay their mortgage, the first thing they'd do, they would write to someone and say, oh, you've missed your mortgage payment, you need to pay it. Well, you could get a copy of that letter sent to you, so you would be notified very quickly if they'd missed a mortgage payment, and you could step in and make that payment for them and just deduct it from future payments you're going to pay to them. Okay, so again, you can just do it that way, or it might be that you pay it direct, and if you miss a payment, then you have to pay it direct to them so they could pay it. So again, it's all down to negotiation. I've done it both ways. I don't really mind which way I do it. I just want to keep an eye on it to make sure the mortgage is indeed paid. Okay, so that's the heads of terms. That's all you need to know paperwork wise, and you might write this out in front of them, get them to sign it. You give them £1. That is then a legally binding contract. But it's not enforceable, because if they went to court, they could say, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. They told me this. They promised me this. They didn't put it down in paper, and they can maybe wriggle out of it. So this is why you take this heads of terms and you send it to the excuse me. You send it to the lawyer, who then puts it into the proper contract. I have seen mistakes where the investor agrees to do an option with the owner, but they don't clarify these agreements. And then they expect their solicitor to negotiate with the owner's solicitor to come to a deal. That's never going to happen, and that should not happen. It's your job to agree the terms of the agreement. That's all you need is what's down here. It's very, very simple. Get the heads of terms down. And the other reason you want to do it with the owner, sitting with them at their kitchen table, is that you can have a copy of this and they can have a copy of this. And because it's in black and white, you know you've mutually understanding of what's been agreed. I'm sure you've had the circumstance maybe where you've had a discussion with someone, you've talked about something, you've agreed it, you've gone away, only months later to find out your understanding of it is different from their understanding of it. I'm sure you've had that situation. Most of us have had that in the past, right? So, and that could cause real issues. And what would happen is, if you don't agree it with them face to face, maybe you go to solicitors and their solicitor tells, well, this is what's been agreed, and they say, oh, no, that's not what it is. And there's all this toing and froing, and maybe you lose rapport and the deal doesn't happen. So by taking the time to sit down, go through the heads of terms, get their full agreement, and you negotiate around these things. The purchase price might vary depending on the length of the option or the upfront fee, etc. So, it's all down to negotiation. An option is like a blank piece of paper. It's whatever you and the other people want it to be. Okay, so that's what you need in terms of paperwork. Then you send it on to solicitors, who should be able to turn it into a proper legal contract for you. So let's think about the process here. So first of all, you find and assess the potential purchase lease option. You got to check, if I take this on, is it going to give me good cash flow? And also, when I eventually buy it in the future, if you buy it, does it stack up as a purchase? Then you agree the deal and you complete the heads of term with the owner to make sure you're both crystal clear on exactly what's been discussed and exactly what's been agreed. Then you engage solicitors, one for you and a separate one for the seller, and they will take the heads of terms and put it into a contract. Then solicitors will take care of all the legal arrangements. So, for example, it might be that you have a restriction on the property, which is where the owner can't sell it or refinance it without you being notified and your agreement. but they'll do that kind of thing for you. And if you're using the right solicitors, you don't need to worry about that. They'll do it for you. The other thing you might want to get is a power of attorney in case this person disappears and in 5 years' time you want to buy it, but you can't actually buy it. You need to make sure you can complete and do that. So that's why it's really good to have them lined up. You need to project manage the process. You've got to keep on top of everyone. You've got to chase them. That's what you're being rewarded. So once you just sign the heads of terms, don't sit back and think it's all done. You got to keep on, chase the solicitors, keep up to date and keep informed, regular communication with the seller so they know exactly what's happening. If they think for any minute it's not going to happen, if they lose confidence or certainty, they might pull out the deal. And you might then have wasted legal fees, which is not good for anybody. Okay? So let's talk about the exit strategy. We talked about what is an option. We've talked about how to find options, how to identify good ones. We talked about, how to do the legal paperwork. What about the exit strategy? Now, there are 4 choices you have at the end of the option period. The first one is you can purchase the property at the agreed price. It's what we call exercising the option. And to actually exercise the option is really important. What you need to do is your solicitor will contact their solicitor, say, yes, we definitely want to buy this property. Okay, it's really important that you do that. Otherwise, if you don't do that, after the end of the option period, it goes back to the owner and you have no rights over it. You may be able to negotiate an extension of the option period. Let's say you've got a right to buy at 200,000 and in 5 years' time the value is only 190. You're probably not going to want to pay 200 for something that's 190. So you go to the owner and say, look, I can't buy it at the moment, the value's not good enough, but would you be interested in extending? Now, they do not have to extend. They might say, no, I want to take it back and I'm going to use it myself or sell it to someone else, which is fine. But if you've looked after it and you've paid everything on time and they don't want the hassle back, they might be saying, yeah, okay, more than happy to extend. So there's no guarantee you could extend it, but you can always go and negotiate with them. You can assign the property onto another buyer. So it means someone else gets to buy it instead of you. Or you could decide to walk away from the purchase. Remember, you don't have to buy, you're not obligated to. My belief is from an ethical and a moral stance, if you enter into a purchase lease option, you should fully intend to buy it at the end of the option period, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Remember that. And I think if you do give the property back, again, you've got a moral responsibility to give it back to them in the same condition that you got it or better condition. So let's talk about exercising your option. You've got to do this if you actually want to buy or you want to assign the PLO to someone else. Your solicitor needs to contact their solicitor, and this needs to happen before the end of the option period. If you do it after that, you lose the right to buy. Then usually once you've issued this note saying, yes, I want to exercise, you normally have 21 days to complete the transaction. So this is very important. You need to think about what you want to do well before the end of the option period to allow sufficient time. If you're going to get a mortgage, that might take several months to sort out. It's not going to happen in 21 days. If you want to sell it onto someone else, again, that might take months to find someone and let for them to get a mortgage. So you've got to plan in sufficient time to get this done. Otherwise, the control goes back to the owner at the end of the option period and you lose the right to use the property. So let me give you an example exit strategy. Let's say over a number of years you get 6 properties on purchase lease option, which, if you take action on this training, that shouldn't be too hard to do. And each one you've secured on purchase lease option for current market value, right to buy at £200,000. In 5 years' time, what would these be worth? Well, let's say they could be worth 250,000. Now, if you assign them on to someone else, so you don't buy but someone else buy, let's say you can make £40,000 for each one, because you might give someone a benefit of buying. So they're worth 250. Say, look, you can buy it for 240. They buy for 240. You get the 40 difference with the price they pay, 240, and what you agree to pay the owner of 200. So in this portfolio of 6, you might say, well, you know what? I'm going to keep the best 2. Whenever you've got rental properties, some are going to be better than others. So you're going to keep the best 2 and I'm going to sell the rest. So if you sold 4 properties and you assigned them to someone else who made 40 grand each, that would be a total of £160,000. Now, obviously, there would be some capital gains tax, or maybe even income tax, depending how you structure it. But this would, even after tax, give you enough to buy the remaining 2 properties. Remember, a £200,000 purchase might cost you 60,000 with the deposit and the stamp duty, so you need at least 120 to buy 2. There's plenty of here, even after paying tax. Okay, so this is a great way by getting a number of options, saying to yourself, I'm not going to keep them all. I don't have to buy them all. Some of them I could sell on to other people. That would help raise the money to actually buy the ones I want to keep. So assigning options. Let's say a property is worth 250 and you've got the PLO on it for 200,000. If you assign or sell to someone else, the new buyer will buy at the full price direct from the seller. So they will pay 250,000 or 240, whatever you agree, direct to the seller. However, you've got the right to buy at 200,000 and you've got a restriction on the property. So in order for the sale to go through, for this new buyer to buy from the original owner at 240, 250, whatever the agreed price is, the seller will have to pay you the difference between the option price of 200 and the sales price to the new buyer of 250 or whatever that is. So therefore, you will get your 50k profit in this case, and the seller only paid tax on the 200,000 revenue. Although the property, although the property sold at 250,000, they've given 50,000 like a fee to you. Okay, so that is a tax deductible expense for them. So they're only going to pay tax on the 200 revenue. Now you would pay tax on the 50k, but then that's money you've got for free, which is pretty cool. So what can you do with PLO? Well, you can live in it yourself. You can find a big house in a better area, find someone who can't sell, step in, agree to rent it for a number of years, and then buy it. And the way you fund that deposit is maybe selling some of the other options to give you the money to buy it. You could rent it out to a tenant as a normal AST. You could multi-let the property to multiple tenants, so you could do it as HMO or serviced accommodation. You could flip it. Instead of buying something, doing it up, then selling it on, why not control it on an option, spend the money, and then flip it on? You could sell to a tenant buyer, someone who moves into the property, they live there. So if you've got existing properties you don't want, sell it. You're selling someone else an option. Now, if you're selling an option, you will get as much as you can as an upfront fee. Typically £3,000 to £5,000. You want them to put some skin in the game. They're going to put the money down. Then they get to buy the property from you for a fixed price in the future. In the meantime, they take care of the mortgage. They treat it like their own property. You don't need a letting agent. They'll look after it for you. Okay. Let me give you a couple of very quick case studies to explain some of the things you could do just to help put this into context. So this was a large HMO in London. Charmaine's one of our clients from, one of my mastermind students from Kent. And basically, she found a former hotel annex that was on sale in southeast London. She'd been looking in the area with her partner for a property to rent to students because she knew in this area there's a real shortage of student accommodation. Now, this particular property was, say, a former hotel annex. The owner hadn't really been using it much because he was running his business down because he was getting old. He was looking to sell. And the annex did need a little bit of work, mainly in the en-suites, in all the bedrooms, and about £60,000 was needed. Now, in case you're thinking, I don't have £60,000, neither did Charmaine. All her money was tied up. She borrowed it from someone else because, as you're going to see, there's such a good return on this deal. She was able to borrow it and pay them a really good fee for using it. The owner was retiring from the hotel business. He had a daughter, but unfortunately she had no interest in the hotel business, and so she didn't really want to go into that business with him. The property was on the market for £900,000, and this was in southeast London. This was a few years ago now, and the problem was it was probably a little bit pricey for what it was given the condition, and the owner had set his mind on how much he wanted because he had a plan for it. What he wanted to do was sell this annex and then eventually sell the hotel, but start off with the annex. He knew he'd have to pay some tax on it. He was going to buy 2 brand new properties, give them to his daughter, which she could rent out. She would then get a rental income, and that's what he wanted to achieve. He would not budge on his price. He wanted a fixed amount because he needed that amount of money to do that plan. Now, Charmaine went in, she used everything we talked about negotiating. Then she realized that she had to ask him what was the most important thing to him. And he said, well, I need this much money because I've got to pay a certain amount of tax and I want to buy these 2 properties. By the way, this is the property. It's a pretty large property, Southeast London. So Charmaine was able to negotiate a 5-year purchase lease option as follows, because she found out what was important to him. And she said, look, so am I right in thinking that if there was someone prepared to pay $900,000 today, and there isn't, by the way, but if there was, how long would it take for that transaction to happen so you got the money in the bank? And the owner said, well, I guess 2 or 3 months. She said, yeah, okay, that's probably about right. And once you got the money in the bank, you went out shopping, looking for a couple of new flats to buy for your daughter. How long would it take to buy those, get them tenanted, get tenants in? He said, well, 2, maybe 3 months, maybe a bit longer. She said, yeah, I agree. So realistically, if there was someone prepared to pay you £900,000 today, and there isn't, but if there was, realistically, it's going to take 4, probably 6 months, maybe even longer for you to start giving a rental income to your daughter. Is that correct? He said, yeah, that's probably about right. So she said, well, I'll tell you what. How about if I agree to give you the full asking price, if you're flexible on when I actually pay you? And in the meantime, I start giving you the equivalent of what your daughter would earn if you sold this and bought 2 flats without you having to go through the hassle of buying 2 flats. How does that sound? And he said, that sounds pretty good. Now, he didn't agree straight away. It took lots of cups of tea, lots of building rapport, but eventually he agreed. And Charmaine said, instead of you waiting 6 months to get this income coming in, we can do it in a matter of weeks. So they agreed the end purchase price of $900,000 in 5 years' time, and in the meantime, she agreed to pay £2,250 per month. How did she get to that? Well, she asked him how much rental income would come from the 2 properties. That was about £2,500 because it was $1,250 for 2 properties, so 2.5 per month. But then she realised that he'd have to have a letting agent. It probably was 10% to letting agent. So realistically, his daughter would get $2,250 because there'd be no mortgages on the properties. So she negotiated to give that amount each month. Now, in case you're watching this case study, you might be thinking, wow, I wouldn't like to promise or commit to pay £2,250 every month to a landlord. That seems like a big commitment. And it does. But if Charmaine was to buy this property, she'd have to put best part of $300,000 in, what with the deposit and the stamp duty. But also, her mortgage would probably cost more than this anyway. So remember I said that earlier. Ideally, you want your mortgage to be more than the agreement you pay the landlord. So this is actually a saving for Charmaine. A big property like this is going to have a big mortgage, right? So this was better off for Charmaine, and it was better off for the owner. And that's important. You've got to understand the alternative has got to be better for everyone involved. And Charmaine looks after the property. She's got a man who does maintenance on it. She pays all the bills on it, and she rents this property out. Now, the thing I haven't told you yet is how big the property is. I showed you a picture, but you may not have seen from that this property has 17 ensuite rooms. And each of those rooms is let out to students all year round for £100 per week per person. That's £1,700 per week income comes in. That's over £7,000 a month. She's got to pay $2,250 per month to the owner. She's got to pay the bills and things. But this one property gives her just under £50,000 profit per annum. This is the property that Charmaine didn't have to put a big deposit into. She didn't have to get a mortgage on. It's in South London, very popular area, and yet by finding this owner and finding a solution that worked better for him than what he was thinking about, it was a win-win deal for everyone. How many deals like this would you need to completely replace your income? This one deal could be a life-changing deal for most people. Now, this wasn't Charmaine's first deal. She came on last, she did lots of property deals, but this was one of her best ones. And I've demonstrated because I just want to show just how much one deal could get you from one landlord. Let me give you another very quick case study. Ashley. So Ashley, basically, his situation was he found this landlord through landlord letters. And Ashley was on Mastermind, but when you're on Mastermind, you get access to all of our online training for free. Other people have paid £1,500 for it. He didn't have to pay anything because he was on Mastermind. He went through that training. He loved the idea of this strategy because he didn't have a lot of money to work with. And this landlord came back to him who was very motivated. And the situation for the landlord was this. This landlord had built up a reasonable sized portfolio. He'd done it over a number of years. As the value of a property had gone up, he had remortgaged it, taken the money out, and gone to buy another property. And that's a great way of building your portfolio over time. What had happened, though, the values had gone up, he'd remortgaged, taken money out, and then the values crashed down in 2008, and they've recovered, but they're only kind of just about where they were previously. So what this meant was this landlord had a portfolio which was making money and had some equity in it. But the problem was some of the mortgages were coming to the end of their term, and some of the properties were empty and needed a bit of work doing to them, but the landlord didn't have the money to do the work, so that were costing him money. And if he sold all the properties in one go, the amount of tax he'd have to pay would actually be more than the revenue generated from the sale. So he was in a bit of a pickle, this guy, and he was honestly thinking that he might have to go bankrupt. Now, he didn't want to go bankrupt, obviously, but that's what he thought he had to do. When he spoke to Ashley, Ashley was able to sit down, look at the figures, and give him a number of alternative solutions that had much more benefits than going bankrupt. So some of the properties did need some work doing to them, and also the rents in the property had not been raised for 7 years. And you'll find that when you buy portfolios, which you can do on option, by the way, instead of going out and buying lots of properties, how about buying one portfolio in your area in one go? From what this can save you a huge amount of time and effort doing this. Now, it does take work and effort. You need to know what to do. You've got to know how to structure it right. But this could save you a huge amount of time and effort. And when you buy a portfolio, you'll find often the rents and the values can be raised by doing some work to the property. So the property portfolio was 18 units in total. That's across 14 properties. There was one block of flats, of 8 flats, worth about 800,000, made up of 6 one-beds and 2 studios, located in a market town just opposite the train station, so really good location for rentals. 5 single-let properties worth 85,000. This is obviously up north, as you can tell, and one 5-bed HMO worth 180,000. So the total portfolio worth 1.1 million pounds. Ashley's got a right to buy this with his business partner Neil in in 7 years' time for the current value. Now, even if property prices dip, which I think they might dip in 2019, 2020, even if they dip a little bit, in 7 years they should recover and they should get some good capital growth on this. The gross rental income, 93,000. Most properties were tenanted. Some needed a bit of work doing in them, which have now done the work and filled those properties. So the net profit after all bills is £4,500 a month, or £54,000 a year. They've got no mortgages. They've not had to put big deposits in. They've spent a bit of money doing the properties up. But hey, if you bought a property, you'd have to spend money doing it up anyway, okay? So a really fantastic deal. I just wanted to inspire you to show you actually you can use portfolios. And, with a lot of the landlords at the moment selling up, there are lots of these potential deals available. And the great thing about this landlord, some of his mortgages are as low as 1.5%. So the mortgages are very, very low on these properties, which means they still have so much profit after all of the expenses. So pretty incredible deal, really. So guys, that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to share with you on this 101 quick start for purchase lease options. I do hope you found this incredibly valuable and stimulating. And my question is, would you like to learn more about profiting from purchase lease options? So as I mentioned at the very beginning of this training, there is some further training with me. We've got lots of different training courses. Some of it's live, a lot of it's online, which is great because you can go and access it whenever you want. My recommendation would be to enroll in our new 6-week PLO home study course. Now, it is currently closed. You cannot enroll in it right now, but you can get on the waiting list and register your interest. If you want to get in it the next time we open it up, you can fill in it. So I'm going to leave this slide up for you for just a little bit of time. You might want to write down this web address. It's http://bit.ly/new, and new with a capital N, then PLO is also in capitals. So this is case sensitive. So please look at what you've written down there. You do need to read it again. You might just want to stop the video if you want to actually just write that down properly. But it's http://bit.ly/capital N capital P capital L capital O for PLO. So purchase lease option. So if you want to learn more, go and register there. You can get on the waiting list, and the next time we open the training up, you'll be one of the first people to know when the training's open. You can come and decide if you want to participate in that training or not. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for investing in yourself in this training. Investing in yourself is the best investment you make. And I do hope I can help you in future. I look forward to meeting you at a live event or maybe in one of our online Facebook groups, our support groups. I wish you all the best for your investing. Thank you very much and farewell.